Hi, I'm Ashton. Welcome back to my floor. This is going to be a bit of a long one, a bit of a long, complicated, and scripted one. So settle in, grab yourself something to drink and something to do with your hands. I have made myself an iced coffee in an attempt to get through this script, and I'm going to be sewing a couple more patches onto my patch shorts. If you stay at the end, I'll give you a quick little patch short update. I've added a bunch of things since I last showed you, so there's your little incentive. Speaking of which, I do a really bad job of promoting this, but I do still have patches available on my online shop. You can find them at graveyardpansy.square.site. I have a bunch of B grades. I have a bunch of colorful ones. So if you're interested in that, you can go take a look. I'm not restocking until I finish my really big print project that I'm working on. So it'll be a while, but there's still stuff there for now if you want to look at it. So 6 months ago, I made a video called I'm Going Off of Testosterone. My next video is going to be my 6 months off of testosterone update, but anyway, in that video, I said this. I'm on a medication called duloxetine right now to help with my chronic pain. It's also an antidepressant. I have mixed feelings about it because I've been on antidepressants for a really, really long time, and I would love to not be on antidepressants. Just like politically, I would love to not be on antidepressants. I don't know if that makes sense, but it'll make sense to some of you. And I got a lot of comments that did understand, but I also got a lot of comments that were like, please expand on this. So that's what I'm going to do today. I've always used this channel to talk about mental health, and I've always used this channel to talk about politics, so I figured why not combine them? This seems like a good video. It's something that I'm interested in talking about. There will be time-stamped chapters if you are interested in or want to reference a specific part of this video, and there are also going to be a ton of links and resources in the description that I would highly recommend you checking out. I'll be mentioning them as we go, but they're organized down there based on what they're about, so hopefully that'll be helpful. Obviously, because I scripted it, this is a video that I have been contemplating doing for a while. Mental health, particularly when you're trans, is something that can be sensitive and people can be really, really unkind about. So I just ask that you be nice to me in the comments. Don't engage with weirdo transphobes. I'm just going to delete them. Do not waste your time. As I must disclose every time I talk about something like this, I am not a therapist. I have a Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology, but that is as far as my professional experience goes. However, I have a lot of experience on the patient side, and that's mostly what I want to talk about in this video. Nothing I say should be taken as direct medical advice. I am not a medical professional. Speak to your own medical professionals. I also wanted to give some content warnings for the rest of this video. It may be obvious given the topic at hand, but I will be mentioning things like institutionalization, self-harm, and suicide throughout this video. I'm not going to be detailed or graphic. That said, you know yourself best, and if you are not up for hearing about that type of thing, then that is okay. Go watch something else. Take care of yourself. Now that you've been warned, I'm going to start with some personal context and personal history. Then I want to talk about my current conflicting feelings about my antidepressant medications. Then we're going to look at the bigger picture and talk about the political context of all of this. Moving from the personal to the political has always been kind of a helpful structure to help me understand things, so I hope it's useful for you too. Obviously, as we know from second wave feminism, the personal is the political, and that's something that I hold very close to my heart, and something that really helps me contextualize my experiences and understand them. And I think that's the intro pretty much covered, so with all of that said, let's get into my personal history with the mental health system. I have a bit of a preamble for this section. So much of this happened when I was young, and I probably don't have the exact timeline of everything completely correct. Not that you would know if I was wrong, but I did want to say that anyway. I also want to make it clear that I am not looking for your pity, your mental health advice, or your psychoanalysis. I feel far enough past a lot of this to comfortably talk about it on the internet, but that doesn't mean it's not sensitive information. I want to share this because it feels important in contextualizing my current thoughts about the psychiatric system. And moreover, I do think it's valuable to share vulnerable things about your mental health, especially as a marginalized person. One of the biggest barriers to recovery and growth can be feeling alone in your struggles. And every time someone opens up about mental health, that type of isolation can be broken up a little bit, which I think is a good thing. At least that's my theory, and that's a large part of my motivation and willingness to talk about these sorts of things online. But with that being said, let's flash back to me about 15 years or so ago. I was a very turbulent child in many ways. I was an undiagnosed autistic kid. I had a lot of personal and sensory and social struggles that I didn't know how to explain or deal with. I wasn't bullied super badly, but I definitely was on the receiving end of relatively frequent harassment for weird behaviors that I now know are because I'm autistic, and gender transgressions that I now embrace, but certainly made me unpopular in middle school. Most days I would come home from school completely overwhelmed and go to my room and have a meltdown. I would hide in my room, cry, scream, refuse to eat, and self-harm in various ways. I felt anxious about everything. I felt a lot of gender dysphoria that I didn't know how to describe or place. I was in multiple unhealthy relationships with various peers where we kind of snowballed off of each other's negative emotions and made each other worse. So my parents did what pretty much any parents of a preteen who's not eating and is self-harming would do: put them in therapy. I was almost immediately diagnosed with major depressive disorder and generalized anxiety disorder. I remember feeling very condescended by that therapist. She would show me cartoon videos about how to identify your emotions that felt really geared towards young children. And yes, I was a child, but I was anxious about things like climate change and transphobia. Those aren't things you can fix by watching an animated dog tell you, when I feel anxious, I get shaky. Like, I knew how to identify my anxiety. The therapist was not helping. She was treating me like I was 7 and I was like 13. I remember hiding in the bushes behind the HVAC unit of my therapist's office so I didn't have to go. It was not working. The feeling at the core of my early adolescent depression was that I often felt tiny and insignificant and incapable of doing anything good in the world. I really struggled with the idea that the world is an unjust place where power is abused and so many people suffer needlessly and I can't do anything about it. That feeling was really overpowering for me. I had a lot of existential dread, and eventually when I was about 13, I attempted suicide and ended up in the hospital. They didn't have enough beds for me in inpatient, so I was given a choice. I could either wait in the bed that I had until they had room in inpatient. It could be 2 days, it could be 2 weeks, they wouldn't tell me. Or I could start an intensive outpatient program, get started at a new therapist, and they would let me leave. I was really anxious about school. I didn't want to miss any school. So obviously I took the outpatient program opportunity. So I started the antidepressants that they prescribed me in inpatient, I switched therapists, and I started going to an intensive group DBT program 2 or 3 times a week for a few months. The sessions were a couple hours long. My parents had to go too, and I didn't like it. It wasn't really my thing. I also resented taking the medications because what depressed kid wants to, but I did it. The therapist I was matched with after my suicide attempt was so much better. She was a Black woman and she knew I was queer and she understood that a lot of the anxiety and fear I was experiencing wasn't unjustified. It was based on real things that I knew to be true about the world. We talked a lot about poetry, she really encouraged me to write, and she taught me that it's completely reasonable to feel sad in a world that's not built for you. I was absolutely devastated when she moved to a different state and I could no longer do therapy with her, but I got a third therapist who was, like, pretty good and I liked her a lot. Wasn't the same. No one could match that middle therapist that I had. I still know her name. I had a third therapist who I went to until I left for college, so I saw her for 5 or 6 years. She was nice, she was lovely, she really helped me understand the impact that childhood sexual assault had had on my mental health, and she gave me a lot of coping skills for anxiety, and she led me towards some more resources about autism as well, but really nobody could come close to my second therapist. Fast forward to now, I'm 2 years out of college, but 6 years ago when I was starting college, I was inspired by the wonderful person that was my second therapist and how much she helped me understand the world. I wanted to be a therapist, so I studied psychology for 4 years. And instead of being encouraged, I felt growing disdain and resentment for psychology as a field, because in my classes I experienced repeated microaggressions and tokenization and a fuck ton of misinformation. You can watch this 2-year-old video of mine called Why Does Psychology Fail Us for a bit more detail on that. But here I wanted to focus more on the being the patient aspect of things. The point is, studying psychology really completed my disillusionment towards it, and today I work with a lot of neurodivergent and mentally ill people, but I don't do it through a psychiatric lens, which feels a lot more fitting for me. Anyway, what really truly helped my mental health, other than having that second therapist that helped me through all of it, was coming out as trans, cutting my hair, changing my name and pronouns, and starting to explore gender presentation. I started testosterone right after I turned 16, and I had top surgery right before I turned 17. Being lucky and privileged enough to access gender-affirming care as a minor, and having parents that were willing and able to pay for it for me, undoubtedly saved my life. Yes, I was having a lot of existential, terrible, insignificant thoughts, but I was also having a lot of dysphoria, and when you put those two things together, and you're 13 and you're starting puberty, life gets really, really hard really, really fast. Having a socially aware therapist absolutely helped, but I cannot overstate the importance of access to gender-affirming care as a minor to me, and it completely breaks my heart that access to that is being taken away for a lot of trans kids today. Really sucks. The other major factor that has improved my mental health slowly over time was learning that I'm autistic, which I figured out when I was about 16. Being able to recontextualize my life, especially my school, social, and sensory experiences, the things that I was bullied or punished for, and the ways that I have always felt really isolated and withdrawn, has been really, really helpful. Learning that I am just autistic and not broken, learning to accept my differences and accommodate myself, that was huge. and it's something that I'm still getting better at to this day. Now, the various antidepressants that I've been on through this entire timeline, I don't know how much they've helped me. And I think that's a large part of my current struggle with whether or not I want to continue taking them, whereas I can pinpoint certain things like specific relationships, my living situations, the pandemic, autism, and transition as things that have impacted my mental well-being over time. Antidepressants are so impossible to point at as helpful or unhelpful because I'm not in a controlled experiment. That brings us to my current struggle with antidepressants. So now I'm 24, and I've been on antidepressants for about 10 years, without any breaks. I've been on various different antidepressants, but I have always been on an antidepressant. All of my teenage life, all of my adult life so far, most of my memorable life, I've been on antidepressants. And I don't know what my brain is like without them. And that's kind of scary to me. I don't love that. I think I went through 3 different antidepressants after my suicide attempt until I landed on sertraline or Zoloft, which I took for about 8 years. Sertraline is an SSRI, a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, and I was on a pretty high dose for a really long time. And as much as I wish I could point to sertraline specifically as a factor, I started taking sertraline at pretty much the same time that I started physically transitioning, which was a huge boost to my mental health. And it's really, really hard to separate those two things because I know for a fact that transitioning was helpful. I have no idea what sertraline did. But about 1.5 years ago, I titrated off of sertraline and went on to a different antidepressant medication called duloxetine, which is an SNRI, a serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor. I've talked a little bit about duloxetine before, but I'm honestly mainly on it to combat my chronic pain that I have due to HEDS. I'm on a daily dose of 60 milligrams, which is pretty low. And my chronic pain isn't awful right now. It's not at the worst it's ever been in my life, but I really don't know how much of that is because I'm at my most active and strong versus how much of that is because I'm on this medication that is supposed to curb my chronic pain at like the nerve-brain connection, if that makes sense. I think that's how it works. Regardless, when I started on antidepressants, I was kind of coerced into them, right? I wasn't given a choice. I was given the option of, if you are leaving this hospital, you are taking antidepressants. And from that point until late high school, college, I didn't really question being on them. They just were a part of my life. I took a happy pill every day, and that's just the way that it was so that I wouldn't be sad. And it's not that I was never sad, right? That's not how medication works, but I don't know how much it helped. But when I think about it more, I've wanted to be off of antidepressants for a while. And as I was writing this video, I broke it down into about 5 main reasons. First and foremost, I never really wanted to be on them in the first place. For me, starting psychiatric medication was a condition of not going into inpatient care. I don't think it's super cool to tell a child that they have to start a medication or be institutionalized. Coerced and forced institutionalization is a massive problem in psychiatric care, and having that experience and being able to reflect on it is one of the things that pushed me away from psychiatric care as an adult. Reason number 2, this is a pretty big one. Since I've started duloxetine, which keep in mind was not even 2 years ago, there have been at least 3 major recalls for carcinogenic chemicals in my medication. And I don't love that. Reason number 3, SSRIs and SNRIs in general have a lot of common side effects, and because I have been on them for so damn long, I don't know what's natural to my body and what is the medication's impact. I do know that when I don't eat enough with my meds, which is hard for me, breakfast is the hardest meal for me, they give me very distinctive waves of pretty bad nausea. Sexual dysfunction and fatigue are 2 other really common side effects on pretty much any SSRI or SNRI that, again, I don't really know if I'm experiencing or if it's just the way that my body is. But I am constantly chronically sleepy, even though I get plenty of sleep. I really struggle with fatigue regardless, and I am also disabled, right? I have EDS, I have autism. It could be from a variety of things, but the medication is one factor that I'm like, would it be better if I wasn't on a psychotropic medication? I don't know. I can't know because it's been 10 years. Reason number 4, duloxetine has some moderately annoying medication interactions. I can't take NSAIDs, which is stuff like ibuprofen or aspirin. Duloxetine and NSAIDs taken together increase the risk of GI bleeding or stomach ulcers, which I don't want to experience. I also can't drink, and I'm not really an alcohol person, but I like to have like a fun drink every once in a while. And while on duloxetine, that can increase your risk for both side effects and liver damage. Low and occasional drinking on duloxetine has not been studied pretty much at all. I haven't found anything about it, but I'm not going to take my chances. The alcohol interaction isn't really a deal breaker for me. It's just like one additional thing on top of a lot of other things. But if my normal chronic pain level is like here, if I've had a really hard week at work, or if I fall off a horse, maybe it goes up to here. I can't take ibuprofen. I can't take aspirin. I can take a Tylenol. But a Tylenol does about this much, right? Tylenol is not that helpful for chronic pain. Reason number 5, this one goes on and off, but I'm usually someone who enjoys dreams and dreaming and talking about dreams. As I wrote this, for 2 weeks straight, I had really intense, vivid dreams, and I was getting really tired of it happening every single night. I woke up my partner a few times saying random things. I generally woke up feeling less well rested. The dreams weren't always nightmares, but sometimes they were, and even when they weren't nightmares, they were really intense and strange and vivid, and I was getting really fed up with it. It turns out that vivid, disturbing dreams are a known duloxetine side effect that I just didn't know about because I wasn't experiencing it. And then I started experiencing it when I started taking my medications regularly. And now I've stopped taking them regularly. I take them, like, I would say 5 days out of 7 days a week, and I'm not getting the dreams. Should I be taking my medication more regularly? Perhaps. But when I go to bed, I want to rest. I don't want to, like, run around, man. It was so tiring. Since I switched meds from my really, really high dose of sertraline to my really low dose of duloxetine, I've definitely had a slight bit more rockiness in my mental health, but it's not a dangerous level, and it's not something that has concerned me or my partner or my doctor. And like anything else with switching meds, I don't really know if that's because of the meds or because I'm in my early mid-20s and it's next to impossible to pin down exactly why I've been feeling up and down. Is it because I'm on a lower dose of a different type of antidepressant? Maybe. Is it because I'm off testosterone now and I'm not used to having a hormonal cycle? I'll talk about that in my next video. Maybe. Is it because as the pandemic continues, I'm feeling increasingly abandoned by the world around me? Maybe. Is it because I'm really deeply impacted by all the injustices in the world and I feel overwhelmed every single day thinking about ongoing genocides and climate collapse and mass incarceration and I spiral really easily? Maybe it's that. For now, I'm staying on duloxetine as an attempt to take the edge off of my chronic pain. It's been helpful to a point. There are still days and weeks where I really struggle, and I can't even take an aspirin about it. I just kind of have to grin and bear it, or take a non-NSAID, which doesn't do shit for me. My pain has gotten more common and slightly more widespread since I stopped taking tea. I'll talk about it more in my next video. Gender-wise, I'm enjoying being off of testosterone. I feel like I've hit a gentle, easy kind of coasting point in my transition where I'm okay with my body's default hormones now, that I've adjusted to my secondary sex characteristics, but having to feel sicker and more in pain in order to feel more comfortable with my gender embodiment, it sucks. Nobody warned me that this is what being trans and disabled would be like. What a rude thing for my body to do to me. I didn't ask for this. But despite all of those things for now, I'm going to stay on my antidepressants for at least a little bit longer, mostly because I need to work to survive, and I just don't know if I could work as much as I do, which, to be clear, is not even full-time without the pain management that I have. I would love to explore non-psychotropic alternatives to duloxetine, but there is not a lot of research on HEDS pain or how to combat it. I wear compression socks on long work days when the 3 pairs that I own are clean. I have a couple of braces that I wear on particular joints when they get extra bad. But, like, what else can I do? And honestly, probably the biggest reason is, as much as I hate to admit it, I am kind of scared of what my brain would be like without antidepressants. I haven't had, like, my raw natural brain since I was a preteen, and the idea of going back to how I felt when I was a preteen is horrifying. I just don't know if I can handle that much of a mental change at this point in my life. As stable as I feel for the most part, it still scares me. But I think that covers everything that I wanted to discuss regarding the personal factors of antidepressant medications for me, but that is far from the only thoughts that I have about them, so let's get political. How does this all tie into larger ideas? If you watched my last video, this will be a familiar topic to you, but I started calling myself an anarchist when I was about 16, and the more that I read and the more that I learned about the world, the more that I have become convinced the problem with the world is not me, it is not people like me, it is not marginalized people. The problems are the cis-heteropatriarchy, capitalism, colonialism, imperialism, ableism, environmental destruction, and the ways that all of these things roll together into the empire we find ourselves living in. And I didn't talk about it before since I wanted to save it for this section, but diving into anarchist thought was another thing that really, really positively impacted my mental health. Remember how when I was 13, I really struggled with the idea of an unjust world of needless suffering where power is abused, and I saw the neoliberal democratic solutions offered around me, and it was pretty clear to me that that wasn't enough. Learning through anarchism when I picked up Emma Goldman that I was not the only person that felt that way was really, really powerful for me. It was one of the first steps I took away from the feeling of I'm tiny and useless against the strength of injustice, and towards the feeling that the revolution exists in every tiny action that we take towards liberation, regardless of how small it may be. And back to the point, anarchism calls psychiatric care into question because it is a hierarchy. Traditionally, the provider has the upper hand over the patient, and anarchism asks, is that necessary? Is that really the best way to get a good treatment outcome? And my answer is no, but don't just take my word for it. There are so many movements and lines of thought that provide really meaningful critique of the psychiatric system as we know it. The ones that I've learned a lot from and found a lot of comfort in are abolitionist thought, a psychiatric survivors movement, and mad liberation, disability justice, and liberation psychology. So this is me introducing you to my friends. I'm by no means a spokesperson for or definitive definer of any of these schools of thought. My goal here is more to talk a little bit about all of these ideas, both to introduce you to them and to discuss what they've taught me about antidepressants and psychiatric treatment as a whole. Of course, per usual, I also want to leave you with some starting points for exploring each of these ideas further, so make sure you check out the description for loads of links about every single one of these. I want to begin with disability justice because it is the first thing of these things that I learned about and something that really changed the way that I thought about myself as a patient in relation to, yes, my depression, but even more so my autism and my HEDS chronic pain. I've talked about disability justice before pretty extensively. I actually have a whole video on disability justice from September 2023 that I rewatched to see if I still like it and would still recommend it, and I would. It's definitely a little bit academic, but if you want to learn about disability justice and you like me, that could be a good starting place. Another wonderful introduction option is the book by Sin's Invalid called Skin, Tooth, and Bone. There is a lot to know about disability justice, but to simplify it for our purposes here, you can think of disability justice as the radical child of the disability rights movement. DJ focuses on principles like anti-capitalism, interdependence, and collective liberation. It's a framework that was developed by queer disabled people of color in order to center multiply marginalized disabled people in disability advocacy and more deeply examine and counteract the ways that ableism interacts with other systems of oppression. I've been really into Clare's writing recently. He's one of the people that founded Sin's Invalid, and his work has been very, very meaningful to me. One of the themes in some of Clare's work is the idea of choosing or unchoosing disability, and there are a lot of quotes that stuck with me, but I wanted to read two of them that felt particularly important and relevant to this discussion, so a bit of a long quote read, bear with me, they're worth it. These are both from his book, Brilliant Imperfection, which I would highly, highly recommend, and I'll have more disability justice book recommendations in the description. We unchoose disability in hundreds of ways. We condone genetic testing for pregnant people, and rarely question the ethics of disability selective abortion. Some pro-choice activists justify late-term abortions with talk about fetal abnormalities, or, in plainer language, disability. We accept as a matter of course that sperm banks screen out donors with a whole host of body-mind conditions considered undesirable, including deafness, alcoholism, cystic fibrosis, depression, and schizophrenia. We walk to end breast cancer, run to end diabetes, bike to end multiple sclerosis, dump ice water on our heads to end ALS. We want to control how, when, and if disability and death appear in our lives. I know hard of hearing people who have thrown their hearing aids away and stopped struggling to be part of the non-deaf world. People who might have been able to walk again after their disabling accidents and chose to become wheelchair users. People who much prefer hearing voices or experiencing emotional highs and lows than managing the impacts and side effects of psychotropic drugs. To many non-deaf people, non-disabled walkies, and people without psych disabilities or psych labels, these choices would seem unimaginable. But from the inside, they make all the sense in the world. They pave the way for finding community and connection. They allow for greater and easier mobility. They allow us to be ourselves. Clare's idea of choosing disability is one of many that pulls me towards going off of my antidepressants. I might be choosing slightly more chronic pain, yeah, but I would also be choosing to live in my own unmedicated brain, a brain that I have not held hands with for 10 years. I'd be choosing disability in multiple ways, sure, but is that really such a bad thing? Or is it a way that I can become more comfortable with myself and relearn what I need and how to accommodate myself? Although for now, while I get used to my new hormonal system and continue pushing myself to work a very physically laborious job that I love, I still feel like going off of my antidepressants is kind of an inevitability. I want a life where I can feel comfortable with my unmedicated brain, and if that means choosing disability, then I want to be at peace with that. More broadly, what disability justice has taught me is that I deserve autonomy and I'm allowed to have complex feelings about treatment. All disabled people deserve to have a say in what their treatment looks like, and informed consent should be the bare minimum. The way that I was treated by the psychiatric system as a mentally ill child, being coerced into medication, my neurodivergence, and justified anxieties about an unjust world being pushed aside to treat what appeared to be major depressive disorder, wasn't okay. And being able to say that and have it feel true has been really healing to me. I, alongside every other disabled person, deserve autonomy. Even if I can't take care of myself alone, I still deserve to have choices about my treatment. Disability justice has also reinforced for me that I am incredibly lucky and privileged. I got to choose to be surgically sterilized in the same world where thousands upon thousands of disabled people and Black and Indigenous people of color, often people with both of those identities, have been forcibly surgically sterilized. I got to choose. There are people with the same diagnoses as me that have been put through electric shock therapy, applied behavioral analysis therapy, psychiatric incarceration, solitary confinement, imprisonment, and more. There are people with different diagnoses from me who have endured the same things, different things, ranging from being coerced into psychotropic medications as I was to being tied into straitjackets. And none of it is okay. None of it is justifiable. So much about the historical and present treatment of disabled people haunts me. And learning how my own history fits into all of it has been both harrowing and liberating. To know that none of us are up against this alone, and that it is possible to thrive while disabled outside or peripherally to the medical industrial complex, that has been life-changing. The books I've mentioned will be listed below, as well as more resources on disability justice. I highly recommend that you look into it if it's not something that you're familiar with. But for now, I need to move on and talk a little bit about the psychiatric survivors movement and mad liberation. Both of these movements and ideas are things that came about before disability justice did, and definitely influenced disability justice as a framework, but I learned about them later in life, so I wanted to talk about them second, because this video is, personal, political combination, intertwining of two. But learning about the psychiatric survivors movement was really impactful for me because it started a long time ago. And it was really wonderful to learn that people have been talking about how messed up psychiatric care is for decades. I'm not doing something new. Starting in the 1960s and 70s, people that experienced harmful psychiatric treatments and interventions started speaking up and working together. They called themselves psychiatric survivors, oftentimes abbreviated to CSX for brevity. There were conferences, there were books, there were protests, there was even research and organizations that came out of the CSX movement, some of which still exist today. And of course, you can find further information on all of it down below. There's a lot of variation within the beliefs of psychiatric survivors, which is fine. People are allowed to believe different things. Some folks are more into psychiatric abolition, which we'll talk about shortly, and others think that psychiatric research and institutions need more funding, as underfunded psychiatric care can definitely be one reason that problematic treatment occurs. Pretty much everyone, though, agrees about a few different things. Psychiatry should not use electroshock treatment, it should not use solitary confinement, it should not use restraints, forced medication, or involuntary commitment. I would like to think that most of those things are self-explanatory as to why people are against them and have been against them since like the 60s and 70s, but I do feel like being against involuntary commitment is probably the most controversial of the bunch. A lot of people argue that involuntary commitment is sometimes necessary for the safety of someone in a crisis. I would argue that it can be really detrimental to pull someone out of their chosen environment and into a sterile, hostile room where they're removed from all of their belongings and their connections when they're in crisis. I just don't think that's the nicest way to treat a person. The CSX movement as a whole is kind of pro-choice about psychiatry, which is often where I stand too. For some people struggling with mental health, psychiatry can help, but there's also a large contingent of people for whom psychiatry has been harmful, who have been abused or mistreated in psychiatric treatment, who were forced into meds that hurt them. And the fact that that group exists at all, let alone in the numbers that it does, means we need to seriously reconsider the institutions that are widely considered the only option for mentally ill people. The ideas of mad liberation and mad pride have also kind of grown out of the CSX movement. People started thinking that being mad, being crazy, isn't something that we need to be ashamed of. Mental illness, like neurodivergence as a whole, is perhaps instead something that we should accept as a beautiful part of human variance that can create valuable ideas and meaningful diversity. Mad people don't need to be medicated or locked away. Mad people need to be loved, supported, embraced, and included just like everyone else does. I feel like that should be obvious. I think everyone deserves human rights, including mentally ill people, but not everyone has always thought that way. I'm going to leave a few starting points for CSX and Mad Liberation below if you would like to explore it further, but for me, learning about its inception out of the civil rights movement in the 60s was a lovely reminder that social justice movements are and have always been interconnected. It also really encouraged me to be more open about the messier parts of my mental health, like self-injurious stuff about being misdiagnosed, medication side effects, because Mad Pride taught me that those things shouldn't bring me shame. We should talk about them, because how else are we going to solve those problems? They're things experienced by a lot of people, things that I can forge connections over that can help me learn more about myself and the world. But Mad Lib and Mad Pride are not the end of it. As I mentioned, we are going to get a little bit into abolition. When I reference abolition or being an abolitionist, I am typically talking about abolishing the prison industrial complex and the police. And I know, you might be saying, Ashton, how is this related to antidepressants? But bear with me for a moment. My introduction to abolition was in May 2020, when I read The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. Yes, I talked about that book in my last video. Yes, I'm talking about it again. As it has for so many people, that book gave me a whole new understanding of the US prison system. It traces how our policing came directly from the slave patrol. It talks about how the supposed No More Slavery Amendment excludes prison labor so that we can make massive profits off the labor of incarcerated people. It talks about how the school-to-prison pipeline targets Black and Indigenous people of color and disabled people, among many other marginalized groups, in order to continually fill prisons and make more profits. It talks about how the war on drugs was manufactured in order to intentionally put more people behind bars, and much, much more. The more you know about policing in prisons, the more and more logical abolition becomes, because reforming something that is so deeply racist and evil is just kind of a misguided project. After reading The New Jim Crow, there were a lot of other books and zines that continued to deepen my knowledge of the PIC and convince me that it is a deeply flawed system beyond being able to be reformed. I really loved Our Prison's Obsolete by Angela Davis. I also got a lot out of the zine What About the Rapists? Anarchist Approaches to Crime and Justice, which is linked below. I more recently read and got a lot out of Captive Genders, Trans Embodiment, and the Prison Industrial Complex, which was edited by Eric Stanley. But reading about abolition really quickly got me hooked, and I still feel as if police and prison abolition is the only way forward. The system that we have is a prime example of institutional racism. It is not a system that can be reformed because its foundation, the entire purpose of the US policing and prison system, is to lock people up, disappear people in order to further white supremacy and make money from it. You cannot reform a system whose core goal is profit through incarceration. If the goal is profit through incarceration, if that's the heart of it, you can't reform something and still profit off incarceration. Like, that's messed up. You understand how that's messed up, right? And as it turns out, anarchism and abolition kind of go hand in hand. I really enjoy radical solutions, radical as in looking at the roots, especially when neoliberal policies or reforms act as band-aids that don't stop the bleeding. When there is a system that is at its roots really evil, doesn't it seem more rational to pull it up by its roots and start over? If you have an invasive plant and you just cut off the leaves of the plant, it's just gonna grow again. Have you ever tried to rip out kudzu? You gotta get its roots. You gotta, get it out. The idea that we would be better off without many of the hierarchical systems we are under is something that's been comforting and very illuminating for me. Once I became convinced that abolishing police and prisons is the only way to begin undoing the harm that they've caused, I began thinking, what else could be abolished? Turns out the answers are endless. If there's a fucked up system, I guarantee you there are people out there fighting to abolish it. And some collective of anarchists has written a zine manifesto about it. I have read some cool stuff about gender abolition, family abolition, border abolition, and here we are back at the actual topic of this video, psychiatric abolition. The idea behind psychiatric abolition, like most schools of thought under the abolitionist umbrella, is that psychiatry, as both a system and as a science, is at its core too rotten to be transformed into something ethical. Eugenics and racism are deeply intertwined with psychiatry's history, and a lot of people will point to Nazi Germany for that, but it was and is just as prevalent in the US and Canada. There will be lots of resources about that down below, and I have talked about it on this channel before, so I'm not going to get too deep into it. But when the treatments that psychiatry offers, even to this day, include involuntary commitment in miserable psych wards, forced restraint, coerced and non-consensual medication, frequent misdiagnoses, and medication of those misdiagnoses, how can we trust the system that exists? Psychiatry may be a sometimes solution for some people, but it's pretty clear from the amount of people that have been calling it out for decades that it doesn't work for the masses. I want to be clear that psych abolitionists do not think we should simply abolish psychiatry and move on as if we don't need something else. The majority opinion seems to be that we need to build alternative structures to mental health care that are more ethical and center healing, consent, and liberatory politics, rather than the current system that focuses on making money and restoring mentally ill people to being functional members of a productive capitalist society. There are infinite ideas for what that kind of care could look like. Harm reduction, education, and services is a big aspect of it. Safe injection sites, crisis hotlines that don't call the cops, peer support groups for a variety of different conditions, medication access through informed consent that is not required to receive other forms of care, voluntary mutual aid-based suicide watch programs, and of course, providing for basic human needs like housing, food, and healthcare is also a mental health topic. People have this misconception about pretty much every branch of abolition where they think that abolitionists just want to get rid of a system and replace it with just vibes. The reality is that if you listen to them, abolitionists have a lot of good ideas for support systems to replace the things that they want to abolish. And a lot of these ideas are things that already exist. And a lot of them have been developed without the governmental funding or institutional support that psychiatry has. The city that I live in, for one, has a rapid response team that diverts mental health calls from the cops. And it is a wonderful example of something that can fit into both a psychiatric abolitionist and a police abolitionist future. My point is there are better alternatives to the systems that we have now. And if it's something you're passionate about, it is possible to collaborate and create them. You don't need the permission of a psychiatric board. Now a little bit on liberation psychology. Lib-psych is the topic on this list that I know the least about, but it's also something that I am interested in, and I think that if psychology is to have a future, it needs to turn away from a lot of the practices that we've been talking about and meaningfully address its racist and eugenicist history, and fully embrace a more radical approach to mental health that directly addresses how capitalism and the tangle of bigotries it enables creates crises. Funnily enough, I was introduced to liberation psychology through a handful of YouTube comments that different people left me. I mentioned it briefly at the beginning, but 2 years ago I made a video related to this one. I kind of detailed all of the bad, bigoted experiences I had as a psychology student and why I was stepping away from that path in my life because I just found it simply too frustrating. And although I do think there are good therapists, there are good people in that world, what I was experiencing in it was simply too much, too overwhelming, too unjust. I couldn't do it. And a lot of people in the comments started discussing liberation psychology, which is a growing subsection of psychology that does acknowledge and aim to make right the repulsive history of psychological institutions. It was developed in Latin America and began largely inspired by a guy called Ignacio Martin Barrow, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong, but Ignacio is a sick-ass name. And he was from Spain, but he realized that a lot of mental health issues stemmed from oppression, and he believed that to improve mental health, we need to destroy oppression and start talking to people about what they can do to de-ideology-ify themselves, essentially. He also believed that psychologists and psychiatrists who ignored that aspect of mental health were contributing to the problem and complicit in said oppression. Pretty straightforward, kind of aligns with everything I've already been talking about, right? And as much as I don't believe those things are radical thoughts, other people sure did, and they were so radical, in fact, that Ignacio was assassinated for having those beliefs because he refused to stop standing up for them. Today, there are therapists that practice liberation-focused therapy, and there are definitely people within academic psychology kind of expanding upon the discipline. But to be honest, I don't know if you can have truly liberatory psychology within the institution as it currently exists. I'm not 100% convinced that you can have a liberatory practice under the eyes of the APA, under the DSM, when you have to charge clients, when you have authority, when you have to report to the cops, when you ask for insurance, you know? That said, I think liberation psychology could be a wonderful tool in a future of psychiatric abolition. One more thing I want to briefly touch on before I kind of wrap it all together. I cannot rightfully make this video without talking about the work of Mark Fisher. I referenced his work in that previous video, but he did a lot of writing about class and affective disorders and how capitalism directly contributes to so much mental distress. I've read a moderate amount of his work, and a lot of his conclusions are things that I have also discovered and learned through both my own experiences and the writings of my radical disabled peers. If you're interested in a more philosophical or academic take, his books may be of interest to you. I don't think his work is really super popular outside of like Marxist academic circles, but it's more accessible than a lot of Marxist writing is. I will say that. Now, I've been talking a lot about psychiatry, but what does this all really have to do with antidepressants? I kind of hope that you've been tying it together as we go, but essentially, so much of our discontent comes from the oppressive structures that surround us. Mental illness is real, yes, and much of it is genetic and situational, but especially in marginalized people, which is most people that are not wealthy, white, cishet men and non-disabled, a lot of depression exists because we are treated unjustly by the world around us, and medications are not going to fix that unjust structure. When a preteen Ashton shows up therapy because they did an overdose, why is the immediate treatment a drug? Why don't they first figure out why he's so damn sad? I think there are a lot of reasons I was put on antidepressants as a young teen, and I know I'm getting personal again, but maybe it was partly because I was in a dangerous near-suicide mental place, but some of it is also just an outdated psychiatric tradition, and some of it, yeah, is a profit incentive. Got a sad kid? Well, we can make money off of them if we put him on Zoloft. Back to my broader point, though, disability justice, CSX, Mad Lib, abolition, and to an extent liberation psychology all offer alternatives to that. And the ways that all of these ideas overlap, how so many beautiful and important thoughts have been had time and time again by so many different groups of radicals throughout so many different but also interconnected movements, not just the ones that I've talked about here, but even more. And those sorts of ideas, those sorts of overlaps are really wonderful to me. I find it really delightful, and it has been much more healing than psychiatric care ever was. When I say I would like to go off of antidepressants, everything I just talked about is kind of under that umbrella. Antidepressants are one tool within a psychiatric system that, at large, I think has a lot of problems and is based on a lot of eugenic ideas, racist ideas, sexist ideas, ideas about controlling and curing people deemed broken because our minds work differently. I don't think psychotropic drugs exist solely to turn a profit. That's certainly a part of it, but I'm sure some of the people that develop and prescribe them truly do want to make people's lives easier. But on an institutional level, the overprescription and non-consensual prescription of them is still a massive issue. If antidepressants are a helpful tool for you, that is okay, that is cool. Like I said, I'm pro-choice. This video is not me trying to convince you to go off of your antidepressants or fire your therapist. I more so wanted to hold your hand and introduce you to some different options. There are peer support groups out there. There are hotlines that don't call the cops. There are people like you. There are so many resources that exist, and I want to encourage you to dig a little deeper into the roots of your malaise, because maybe you'll find something meaningful that you can act on in the same way that I did. This video took me around 6 months to write. It's something that has been simmering on my back burner for quite a long time, and the more that I think about it, the more that I feel edged towards going off my meds, even if only to experience my raw brain for the first time in 10 years and feel more connected to who I actually am for a bit. I am going to wait until I see my doctor again, and I worry a little bit that she won't be super gung-ho about it, but generally she's very supportive of my medical autonomy, and if you all are interested, maybe I'll talk about my tapering off experiences once it happens. I think the more that I reflect on it, the more that I think it is something that is in my near future, and writing this video has kind of helped me decide that, so thank you. Thanks for inquiring about my statement and encouraging me to talk about it. If you're still listening, wow, congrats and thanks. I hope you learned something, I hope you feel less alone, and I hope some new political possibilities have opened up for you. As promised, since you made it to the end, you get to see my patch short update. I had to take all of the metal and chains off because I went on some roller coasters recently, but all of the patches that you've seen before on the front are still the same, but I've added a bunch to the sides and the back. This one is still pinned on, but it's one of my own patches. If you want a Hellbound patch, I have a few left. I also added this little 13 patch just now. This one was DIY'd by one of my lovely punk friends who I trade patches with a lot. You know who you are. I love you. This one is a really fun Fox anti-copyright patch that I got at a Mask Block art sale recently, so that was cool. And then I also have a tiny little crass patch on the side that I added, and those are my additions. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I hope that you learned something, perhaps about yourself or about the world, or about me. Probably you learned something about me. Feel free to let me know what you think. Make your own additions in the comments. As I said in the last video, comments are my favorite part. I will see you down there. Goodbye, comrades. I hope you are staying safe in the chaos that is our current world. Be yourself, wear a mask, free Palestine, and I will talk to you later, maybe.